So, hey, how you doing, man?
What's happening?
Episode 2, you made it. Did you do any of the stuff you said you were going to do before? Just messing around with Blazor and
I have, and I've written some apps I've kind of learned on my own. It's
cool.
funny. One of the things I think we need to talk about is, do I actually need to go through this process?
Yes.
And I learn on, I met a new friend, man. I
Yeah.
got a new BFF called Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Um, but what it is, it's what we've actually learned. Um, and I know this is kind of a kind of a left turn on what we're doing and I know there's a lot of controversy around, people going to become dumb because they're trying to get AI to do all the work for you.
Right.
I found it to be a great tool. Um, a few things that I missed from you. I would literally I wrote a program that was basically a calculator. And, I learned what methods were and try to figure out it's a switch. It's almost like an if-then statement, but it's kind of a different approach. But anyways, I was writing some coding error and from design. So I copied and pasted the code in there. And the guy said, "You're an idiot. Call Carl Franklin."
Wait a
you
minute.
know,
What guy?
to
Chat
chat
GPT
GPT.
said
Yeah,
you're
he
an
said,
idiot. Call Carl Frank.
yeah. No, what it did, it showed a couple errors. And so what it does is it's a great person to have next to you
Yeah.
if you're going through this process. And that's one thing that I feel is there are a lot of things that I miss because I don't know. And you can keep going there, explain it further, explain it in terms. And it's funny because they came up, a lot of the examples that Chat GPT came up with was referring it to like food analogies, like
Really?
cooking analogies. Yeah,
Wow.
it was weird. So either they knew that I was in food or something that I had chatted before, who knows? But I think what it is there's a lot of resources that are out there, but there's nothing that beats good fundamentals and
Yeah.
having somebody with years of experience to really navigate
That's true
around where
because
to start.
you
So
like you said last time, you don't know what you don't know, right?
yeah,
So, and part of what I'm doing is, yeah, we can learn the syntax to do calculator and the syntax for C sharp, and you'll learn that. But
yeah,
more importantly, you have to, you nailed it last week when you said, or last time when you said, architecture is the key, right? If you don't
mhm,
architect your application correctly, and that's not just in terms of where files are stored, but how you call objects, how you create them, how they get reused. You may run into memory leaks. You may run into performance issues, right? So
yeah,
and there's no one way to do everything all the time. So you kind of have to have, just like in cooking, you kind of have to have a sixth sense, you know? Oh, you have ratios in your mind of when you have a bunch of flour, how much baking powder does that need? Well, about that much, right? Because you know ratios. And yeah,
yeah,
well, okay, maybe that's a bad example because baking is very accurate, but you know what I'm saying? How much salt to add to a sauce? You,
yeah.
you can tell just from how much sauce is in there and how salty it is. So that's what I'm hoping to get going with you. But there's a couple of things today that I want to talk about that we can use metaphors for to learn about the difference between two types of variables. You said you know what a variable is, right? So that's what I want to talk to you about right now. So I've just got another Blazor server application up here.
Why don't we do a quick repeat on what we're looking at here on this Solution Explorer window is what
Sure.
that's called.
Yeah,
And so just kind of give me an overview of what each section does.
absolutely. No problem. So this is the template of a Blazor server application. So it has stuff in here that you wouldn't necessarily have in a bare bones application. So there's a web root. This is where all of the JavaScript and CSS and things that are webby go.
Mhm.
The data folder is just a way that these folders are ways that you can organize code. It doesn't make any difference, except for the web root. The web root is a known entity, right?
Yeah.
But data, pages, shared, these are just arbitrary folders that the Microsoft team came up with. These are the routable components or pages. And these are the non-routable components, such as survey prompt, which I'm showing here, right? That's a component. This imports razor is using statements that you're going to use in markup. And we didn't even talk about using statements, but .NET and most modern languages separate their code into things called namespaces. And these namespaces can map to, particular components that you download and install, but a lot of them are just in the framework, like SystemNet HTTP. That is where the HTTP client is, and the HTTP client is the workhorse of the industry, going out and fetching data from the internet and bringing it back.
So I'm basically hiring a client, or the client's paying me?
That's pretty good. But all I'm saying is that, like, this using statement, this namespace, Microsoft JS Interop, is where the code to interact with JavaScript in C#
Sure.
is, right? So all of these things are separated into namespaces. And rather than having to say, and again, you don't need to know what an HTTP client is, but if I was to say HTTP client, we'll get to the naming in a minute, equals new HTTP client. Okay. If I didn't have that using statement in there, this guy wouldn't know where HTTP client is. So check it out. I'm going to just remove that and save the file. Now I go back and it doesn't understand where HTTP client is. So I could say system.net.http.http client. And now it understands. But rather than having to qualify those each time, right, I can use a using statement. And I can even put it up here if I just want it on this page, system.net HTTP. I could even put it up there. And now we don't need these.
And that's just getting really efficient in the architecture.
Exactly. Yeah. So the namespaces are just a nice way to organize things.
Yeah.
Now, this using statement is only here on index. If I try to access it in another page or another component, it's going to have a problem. So that's why they invented this imports razor. And imports razor, _imports razor, is where you put all your using statements that any component can access, right?
Gotcha.
And so we don't need to know how to use HTTP client right now. I'm just trying to tell you where that is.
Yeah, no, I get it. So basically, I've seen this before, the www root. So when I build websites, all that information is where you're getting the design, the type font, and all
CSS,
the other CSS,
the styling.
So basically, this makes a little bit more sense to me.
But also, if you wanted to, say, show images that are going to be in the markup, you might make an images folder and then put your JPEG files in there, like this one, favicon PNG, is in the web root. So then we can reference that in the code, and it's not in our, application.
So you're going to reference it. You're going to reference it there, and so when you do these web apps, and you actually, and what's the term when you not process it, when you
compile it?
You compile it, yeah.
Build it.
That's where you're going to upload it. All your information will go in those folders there, correct?
Well, sort of. I mean, all of the data, like in the data, the pages, the shared, all of this stuff gets compiled into executable modules called DLLs, dynamic link libraries. There's a whole reason why they're called DLLs. It goes all the way back to the earliest versions of Windows. But needless to say, they're like executables that you can load up in memory and run as part of another program.
Gotcha.
All right.
Let's get back to where you were.
Yeah, let's get back to where we were. Okay. So let's say we have an integer, int my number equals 0. Okay. And now let's make, let's hook a method that's built in. And I'm going to do this by overriding. And the method that's built in is called uninitialized. So a method is just a function, your Visual Basic. So you would call it a function in Visual Basic, or a sub. And The only difference between a function and a sub in Visual Basic is the sub doesn't return anything, and the function does have a return type.
Okay.
All right. So void is how we do that in C, C Sharp, all the C languages, Java. So void means it doesn't return anything. Now this override, and we'll talk about protected in a minute, but override means that my base class, which is basically a component, a Blazor component, has this method onInitialize in it. And rather than it being called directly by whatever system, we're overriding it. We're hooking it. Does that make sense? So rather than calling the base class's onInitialized event, the whole system will call our onInitialized event. And I can put a breakpoint right here and run it. A breakpoint is just that. When I run it and we get to this point in the code, it's going to stop right here. Now, I could move the browser over, but it doesn't matter. It's still loading, and you see this breakpoint has caught here. So that means our onInitialize override works. So now I can put any code that I want when it starts up in this method. So I'm going to say my number equals 1, right? Or you asked me about plus plus. I could also say my number plus plus. And that basically
now equal to, you're setting it equal to 1. Initially it's 0, then you're going to set it to 1 in that method.
Yes.
And then you're going to add 1 to it after it. So the value is actually going to be 2.
Yes.
At the end of it, if you look at it.
So my number right now is 0. You can see that when I hover over it, it says my number 0. Then I'm going to press F10, which goes to the next line. And now my number is 1. You see that, right?
Yep. And you hit it again, and now
hit
it's
it again.
2.
You got it. My number is 2.
So what I want you to do real quick is the name of the method.
Yes.
Right? Is what? Is it protective or protected?
Well,
or is that
protected is a scope term. So scope means what can access this. Only this page code. Outside of this page code, like if it was a component or something, and if I wanted that, then it would have to be public. And protected is sort of like halfway between private and public.
So that's where you would say is, so for example, you would have private void or public void.
Yeah.
Public would allow that to call it, but you're actually just sending in information to do something, and you're not returning a value.
Let's look at survey prompt. This is a better way to understand. So remember the parameter that I told you about?
Sure.
And we have a public string property title, and this get set just means I don't need control when it's read or written to. Otherwise, I would have to be more explicit here. So if I had a private, let's say int or void, int returns an int, private int get int. Okay. Then I'm going to return 100. Okay.
So what you're basically is you can call the method get int.
Yes.
Is the method. So in anywhere else in your, or not, it's private. So anywhere
it's
else
private.
In this class.
In this code block right here, in this class, see, you're right.
Yeah.
I can call get int, but somebody outside, let's see, index razor, somebody outside, like if I can't say, oh, well, if I want to access survey prompt, I have to add a reference to it. And we'll talk about references in a minute. Survey prompt, ref equals survey prompt. All right, so now I've got a reference to this and I can access it in code. So if I wanted to say survey prompt dot get int, it's not going to understand that, right? If I say my number equals survey prompt get int, because it's private, say it says survey prompt get int is inaccessible due to its protection level or its scope. If I go back in here and I make it public, now everybody's happy.
And so what you're doing is you're saying survey prompt, you're referencing this service prompt, and then you're defining it and saying the number equals.
Yeah, I'm calling a public method, get in.
Exactly. And so the name of the method, right, is what?
Get in.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
And go back to that page. Yeah.
Public means that it's publicly accessible. Int is the type that it returns.
Yeah, and integer is actually it. And then the parameters, you just keep it blank.
I don't have any parameters, but if I wanted to, I could say, int seed, passing a seed, and then I could say seed plus 100, right? I could pass a parameter to it. Now, of course, this is going to require that I pass a seed. So let's say 1. And now that's going to return 101.
So just a real quick question here, which is a random thing. So most of the programs that I've been designing have been in the console.
Yeah.
Right. Console apps. And so when one of the things is write line or read line. So read line would be, you would put read line, and I forgot what the thing is, in quotes, or console dot read line with the brackets, waits for a user response to type it in and hit enter.
That's right.
Right. And so in the program in the Blazor app, and tell me if I'm saying these things wrong, but in the Blazor app, you're looking at a browser. You're looking at a web browser, not a console.
That's right.
What is that same function in the Blazor apps?
Console write line? Okay.
You're not saying console write line. How are you using it?
You actually can. Let me put it back here.
I guess the console would pop up, and that's where you'd be here.
No, that's not true. No, it writes it to the debug. So here's the issue. Let's go here. I'm not going to call this, but right here I'm going to say console.writeLine my number. Okay. If I do that, it's not going to pop up a console window, but what it will do, hopefully, is write it out to, it used to do this, right? It used to write it out to debug. And now we have to use system diagnostics, and then it's debug.writeLine. And now watch what happens. You used to be able to use console writeLine, but you can see that there, right? 2. So it printed it out.
We want a read line is what
No. There is no read line in a web app. To get input, you have to use an input box.
Gotcha.
Now here's a quiz for you. I get down here, my number is 2. You can just ignore these, right? My number is 2. And then I create another variable called second number and set it equal to my number. Then I set my number to 23. What is second number going to be at this point?
Second number is going to be 23.
All right, let's run it. All right, so my number is now 23. And second number is 2.
Let's walk through this again here. Oh, I gotcha. See, that's a trick question there.
Well, but these are things that every programmer needs to know.
Yeah. So what I did is my number equals 2 at the end of that line. The next line is you're defining second number as an integer and you're equaling it to my number.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're changing my number to 23. The thing is you've already defined the second number. It didn't pass anything on to it. Right.
Well, you're close. You're close. The reason that this behaves this way is because integer is what we call a value type. And a value type exists by itself without references to any other value type. All right. The other type that you could have is a reference type, and you can use that with a class. So let's make a class my ref type, and I'm going to create a public int property called number with a getter and setter. All right. So now if I say var, which is sort of like dim in Visual Basic, right? Var ref type 1, equals new my ref type. And I'll say ref type 1 dot number equals 23. And then I'll say var ref type 2 equals ref type 1, right? And then set ref type 1 number to 100. What is ref type 2 number?
And let me walk through this here.
Well, I'll give you the answer, and you probably can figure it out. It's going to be 100. Because when we assign this variable, second number is first number, you're copying the value of this number into that number. But when we do this, we set ref type 2 to ref type 1, we're copying the reference to the object that's in memory.
Gotcha.
The reference, right?
So reference is one. What was the initial one? Not a reference.
Value type.
Value type.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just confirm that ref type 2 number is going to be 100. Ref type 2 number is 100. Okay, so we set ref type 1 number to 100, and that also changed ref type 2 because they point to the same part of memory. They point to the same object in memory.
And you did that with a VAR, correct?
Well, VAR is just like dim. So I could have done the same thing here. I could have said int my number right here, and then, or var. I could have said var, right? var.
Now that would have changed it to 23.
No, var isn't only for reference types. It's for whatever. It implicitly understands that this is an integer, a value type, because we set it to 0, an integer.
So say that again.
C# implicitly knows that my number is an integer, even though we specified it with var, because the value we assigned is an integer, 0.
Which creates a value type.
Yeah, an int is a value type. It does create an integer. Let me run this again.
Sure.
Okay,
I'm missing something though.
So look, if I look at my number, it's a value type. It's an integer. My number is an integer. And the value type, I can use var, that's okay. Second number is 2. My number is 23. They're independent because this copies the value, right? The reference type, I can use var again. var doesn't matter for reference type or value type. But because I created a reference type here, when I set the number of ref type 1, ref type 2 also changes because this variable points to an object, a reference type. And it's an object because I created it with a class.
How do you define a reference type?
This is it right here. A class is a reference type. Any class. It doesn't matter what we call it.
Gotcha.
I could call it Carl,
So now that's a reference type, and then it's public integer number.
Yeah, this is the variable on it. So I'm going to illustrate this. So in Windows, I'm going to create a new text file. And this is called v1 for value type 1. And I'll open it up in Notepad, and I'll just type 23 in there. Now, if I right click and I copy and paste, let's call this v2. And I open this up and I set this one to 100. This one is still 23 because these are independent values. All right. Now get this. If I create a shortcut to this one and I open this, it's going to open this guy, right? If I create a copy of that shortcut, it's also going to point to this guy. If this one sets the value to 25, when I open it with this shortcut, it's also going to be 25
because this shortcut.
These
Go
are
back to the
these
code
are
for
value types and these are reference types, like a
sure.
shortcut on your desktop.
So what's happening right now is the class is what you're actually defining as a reference type. So scroll down a little right there.
Yeah,
That's where it's happening, right?
right.
So now the reference type is a number,
Yep.
which is a public integer.
Well,
And
the
then when you,
reference type is an object. This is an object in memory. And that's what we call them. We call them objects. A class is the recipe to create an object.
yeah,
When I create a variable or an object right here with new, that is an implementation of that recipe. So this is a cake that I made from this recipe right here. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I know it's just, but I'm trying to figure out how do you call that. So, for example, I want to call the class or the object. The object is Carl. Is that correct?
No, the object is a Carl object, and this is the name of my reference to it. This is the name of the shortcut on the desktop.
Gotcha. So you define the class Carl,
Yeah.
and then down within that class, the public integer does what?
This is a property of the object. You can see I'm referencing it right
Yes.
here. And that's
Yes.
an int.
So when you say dot number, you're getting it and setting it.
I'm setting it. Yes.
You're setting it. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. So I got it. It's a property. So whenever you put in, I'm not sure why it equals new Carl, but when you
Well,
put
new
reference,
actually instantiates a new object in memory. So that's
Gotcha.
what new does. It allocates the memory for that object.
Gotcha.
But when I do this, when I just say this equals that, I'm just copying the reference. I'm not creating a new object.
Gotcha. And so what you're doing then is that's the dot. That way it'll show up when you put reference. It doesn't matter what the reference type. You can call where it says VAR ref type 2.
Absolutely.
You can call that bananas.
Yeah.
Right. And equals. I actually have to go before. You're actually defining it up top where it says VAR ref type 1 equals new Carl. And then you're saying ref type 1. And then when you hit dot property or dot something, that's when number will actually pop up.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. And then you define that property. I'm still not sure why you put new and Carl and defining memory and why you're only doing it there on the first one.
Because I'm illustrating how to create an object and you create it with new from a class name, right? So new Carl creates a new cake from this recipe. And that
you only need to do that. You only need to do that once.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I only did it once. You can create objects as many as you want, but every time you create one, you're creating new memory, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the same here. I have two value types, and you can say that my number is one object, is one cake from the recipe of integer, and the second number is another cake that if you could just take the cake and clone it, that's exactly what you're doing here.
So you would still define it as Carl though, correct?
Where? Here?
Yeah.
No, these are just integers. They're value types. This is the reference type, Carl, or, whatever.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I understand that. How you apply it, no clue.
Well, we're gonna see that as we go through this, that these things come into play. Yeah. So it's just, you have to know these things, right? When you go to play around with code that, what gets created and how come when I, set this to that, how come the value didn't change, right? Now, I'm going to show you something else. There is an interface, and I know this is a new word for you, but it's called iClonable. And we don't even need the interface, but I'll use it anyway. And an interface is sort of like, I would say it's a recipe for a class, or it's a recipe for a number of methods. And so when you implement an interface, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm not even going to do this right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to do this, but let's say I have this particular method here. And I'm going to say var retval, which is return value, equals new Carl. And then I'm going to say retval number equals this number, which is whatever my object is. And then I'm going to say return retval. So this is a way that you can clone an object and get the value, right? So if I say bananas equals ref type 1.clone, now it's going to call into here, create a new Carl, set the number to whatever the number of this one is, and then return it. And now I've got 2 instances. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
And
It's
so
thing
now
that I'm having trouble.
Now it's going to be
getting
different. Number, ref type 1 number is still going to be 23. I'm sorry, 100. Bananas dot number is going to be 23. Not 100, because we actually do have 2 different objects in memory.
And what it is you're pulling the clone one right here, and that's taking it, which is defined down in the class. I can't scroll down right there.
That's it. Yeah. I'm creating a new Carl inside of Carl. I'm creating a new one of me.
Yeah.
All right.
And the variable or var ret val has nothing to do. All that's doing is setting number, right? It's returning the value into Carl clone.
Yeah,
correct?
well, I call it retval because that's what I'm going to return. I could, I could do something like this, cloned.
Yeah, I know. One of the confusing parts is it doesn't really matter, cloned, right? That's only just for this one little section,
right?
That you have it in this class. And when it returns the value, when you're calling the method back,
yep,
right? That's where it's passing the value. That's what that's for, right?
Well, clone gets a clone of this object. Right. And so whatever properties you have inside, this project, if I had another property that was like, if I had another property that was like, a string, message or something like that, I would set that here. Cloned message equals, but this is a well-known pattern for creating deep copies of objects.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, now there's one more thing that I want to show you. And that is, I told you that this get set is good when you don't need control when somebody reads or writes you. But what if somebody does? You can specifically create what we call getters and setters. And so that means I want to have a private, what's called a backing field for this number. So I'll say private int lowercase number, and maybe I could initialize it to 0. It doesn't matter, but you can initialize it right there. And then in get, when somebody reads that property, I can say return number. And when somebody sets the property, I can say number equals value, and value is a built-in keyword that represents the value that somebody set it to. So I can put breakpoints here now, and I can implement code when the value, when number is read right here, and when number is set. This is just another thing we can do. So let's go back to, where am I? My number is 0, so it's going to be on Carl, right? So right here, when I set it to 23, all right, I'll press F10, and now we're setting. The setter fires, and the value is 23. And now, again, when I'm reading the number, see, I read clone. I called clone, and clone read the number, this number, which is 23. And I'll continue going back through here. And then I'm setting the value of cloned number to 23. Keep going and returning cloned. And now now I have two objects, and I'm setting the value of ref type 1, which is mine, up here where the value is 23. I'm going to set that, and here number is 23, but value that I'm setting it to is 100, and now number is 100. Isn't that cool?
It's hard to follow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest.
And I expect
I
it to be.
understand it. And so what I need to do is we need to come up with some sort of exercise that simplifies that process. And one of the things that's helped me is to literally draw it out on paper.
Yeah, okay.
And not code. And rather than using integers, it's like, here's the class, and then you write out what it does. Here's this section of the code, and it's got to be a graphical representation and not the code.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I started with the computer program is I kind of drove up and used imagery of what would happen in each process or each part of the program and coding. And then I went back and learned how to do each part of those codes. And I told you the difficult part for me is the whether I was doing the if-then statements for whether you're picking an operator, plus, minus, division,
right,
in the method or doing it up. And so that's kind of where I think the difficulty is understanding, what part of this code that you're actually trying to write without a frame of reference for what you're doing.
So here's my advice. My advice is I wouldn't try to create further abstractions. The code is where you should train your brain to think, right? And to do that, take this code example, step through it again, and F10 goes through every line by line. You can set breakpoints, you can look at it, but getting used to looking at code and understanding it is going to be a superpower for you, and for anybody who's going to be programming. And I understand, basically what you're doing is you've got this, pain from learning this completely new paradigm, this new abstraction, right? And it's human nature to want to just, create graphical versions of this. But in the end, it would be just as confusing in the graphical layout, and it wouldn't be
I think
it wouldn't be as expressive.
So what I think for me is, and believe it or not, I'm having trouble following along because I'm already thinking about what's the possibilities of what you're writing.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you're doing that. So I'm thinking like, where am I going to design
how can I apply that? Right.
Or how can I apply it? Where it can I go with it? Or like, wait a minute, you're doing all these classes to define something, and then you're defining the clone within that class. And what I'm thinking
believe it, and you're right. This the example that I just did has no useful application whatsoever. We're just examining the behavior of variables and reference types and value types.
I get that. But at some point, I feel what'll help people, so a few people watched the video of what we did last time, and they're like, I had no idea, couldn't follow.
Right. Yeah.
So is it entertaining for them? Absolutely not.
I think
so. They do just like, no, I don't think so. They tell me, he says, yeah, if it wasn't you, Rob, I'd be like, click, turn it off. And so for me, I think what would help this process is to start off each one of these sessions with just some funny reference around, today we're going to bake a cake.
I'm going to create a class, and the class is going to be called Cake.
There you go.
All right. Whoops. I don't have those.
But just for your reference, for entertaining purposes,
yes,
we should come into this thing and not even talk about code. We should talk about, all right, we're going to bake cake.
Absolutely.
For 20 people.
What is a cake? What are its properties, and what can you do to it?
Yeah.
So we know what a cake is, right? So property of a cake might be
icing,
frosting. Yeah, icing.
Right. Color.
Style?
No, it would be what do you call it? See, now we're drawing a blank. What the hell's cake? Cake is just cake.
Well, it's a cake,
There's no
right?
there's
So
no
I think you
property
should
on
have a
cake.
style. I think you should have a
Yeah.
style like Bob, rum cake, bunt cake,
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Okay. And the icing is the icing flavor.
Yeah, put stay at style flavor. Flavor
All right.
would be good.
All right. Icing style. Where am I to?
Style is a type of cake. What type
Yeah.
of cake?
Style is type. Icing and then flavor. All right. So now we're going to should we have a list of ingredients? And then should we have a mix method and a bake method? Should
So
we have
so
a
so this
Boolean
is
that determines what state it's in? Is it cooked or not? Is it ready?
so so what we're doing that is now when I call this public class or whatever it is, it's going to be dot and then it'll say style,
You
flavor,
got it.
icing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So see how all of a sudden that makes sense to me in
Yeah,
this
sure.
reference?
Yeah, sure.
And plus people get to talk about cake. Like, and
Of
who does
course.
not want to who doesn't want to watch a boring grammars not talk about cake?
So let's keep going.
All right.
So let's have a public void that doesn't return anything, mix. And we'll have a public void bake. And then maybe we'll have a read-only property or a method, either one.
So is this is not under the class section or is it?
Yeah, this is inside the class. We haven't even
Okay.
used this yet. We're just
Gotcha.
setting up the template for a cake. So let's have a method that returns a string description. Okay. And that's going to return. And I'm going to concatenate a string together here. And for that, I'm going to use the dollar operator. And that way I can
concatenate means you're just putting together strings that print out stuff. Gotcha.
I'm a style. Whoops.
Now I've never seen that thing.
Okay.
What's the dollar sign again?
This is how you can embed, come on, values in a string, like so, in curly braces. I'm a style cake.
But what's the dollar sign do?
That allows me to use these brackets and
Gotcha.
embed these values in the string. Let's do another one for flavor. Let's do flavor before style, like I'm a chocolate bundt cake, all right? With icing. Okay. Before we return this, let's just say var description, which we know is going to be a string because var knows that this is a string. See, it says string because I set it to a string. And then I'm going to say, let's have a Boolean for mixed and baked. All right. So let's have private Booleans. Private bool. Boolean is just 0 or 1, true or false. Mixed equals false. Private bool baked equals false. Okay, so here mixed, I'm going to say
default of, right?
Mixed is true. You got it. And here I'll say baked is true. All right. So now I can say if mixed, description, is description plus I have been mixed. Let's put a space there.
Plus equal sign is equal.
Plus equals is like saying description equals description plus. It adds to the end of that string.
Say it again.
This would be this. It's a shortcut for this. Right?
Gotcha.
It adds this string to the end of this string and then returns it back into the original string. So we'll do the same thing with baked. Just a little copy and paste. And then we're going to return description. Okay, so now this is our whole class here. All right, we've got a style, flavor of icing, and mixed and baked are private. So we're only accessing them. When somebody says mixed, we're going to set mixed to true. When somebody says bake, we'll set bake to true, and then we'll return a description. Now up here, I can say var, what do you want to call it? Robert's cake
Sure.
equals what? New cake.
Gotcha.
And now we can say Robert's cake dot
And then
style equals, what do you want? Bundt cake?
Sure. Fudge cake.
Flavor is going to be chocolate.
Yeah.
Chocolata.
Chocolata.
And
see, and that's where I was doing it before, where I didn't even do this, is I was doing equal to console dot read line
yeah,
or
right.
enter cake, whatever, but
Yep. And then icing is fudge.
so explain really quick again here, because before I was just using Robert's cake as a string.
Yeah.
A var or VAR, you're just reserving memory for that.
I could also say this. Right? Var is just so I don't have to specify the type. It's a variable and the type is inferred. But I could be explicit about it and say this is a cake.
And that's because you have a class called cake.
Yep.
Right? But what you're doing is
New is what creates it. New is what creates it. Var is just so I don't have to specify this twice. And I heard it explained like this. If somebody came up to you and said, "Hi, my name is Carl. My name is Carl." You've repeated yourself on the same line of code. You would think Carl's an idiot. So because we've already said it's a new cake, we can use var if we want to as a shorthand. I'm used to using var.
No, that's fine. And I like that too. It makes more sense to me. But if you were to use string there, it would not work.
You're right. Absolutely. Because
string is not defining.
Because Robert's cake is a string and you're setting it to a cake. Cannot implicitly convert type cake to string.
And that was the problem that I had with when I was passing within methods. It was strings and strings and integers. It was making all kinds of things. So that's cool.
All right. So now we'll write Robert's cake description and we'll run it. We'll see what happens. We have a problem. Why do we have a problem? Oh, description is a method, not a property. So therefore we have to call it with the parentheses. We could make it a read-only property too. It's just kind of semantics at that point.
Yeah.
I'm a chocolate bundt cake with fudge icing. All right. Now you don't see mixed or anything like that. So if we say Robert's cake mixed, now it'll say, I have been mixed.
Now go through that because I didn't see how that. I just
All
want
right,
to walk through that part.
Let's put a breakpoint right here and run it. So I'm going to press F10. Now when I go to get, okay, I pressed F10. Oh, I know. I need to press F11 if I'm going to go into a particular method. Right, so I press F11. Mixed is true. Okay. Now when we go into description, here's my description. And if mixed, I'm going to add I have been mixed. But baked is false, so it skips over that and then returns description. Cool. Now if we say Robert's cake bake, It's going to add I've been baked to the end.
Cool.
Make sense?
Yep. So it works. It just works whether you're in
Console or Blazor, it doesn't matter.
Or Blazor, yeah.
Console app is kind of better for learning because you take away all of the stuff that isn't the language, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been writing it in. So
yeah,
very cool.
All right, good. I think this is a good place to stop.
Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to add the code in the what do they call that? What do all you gamers do?
In the repository?
You could look down in the. You could look no. You could look down at the bottom, and there's a link to the code.
Oh yeah,
and then smash that like button.
Absolutely, smash the like button.
And if you want the recipe for the cake code, the cake code, right? The recipe for the cake code is down below.
Yeah, well, we'll add a link to it.
Cool.
All right,
man.
All right, I'll see you later.
See ya.
Bye.